So, part 2, history of cars, my cars at least, and the other side of the pond. Which actually started on a fairly auspicious note before I'd even left the shores of rural Britannia. I sold the Corvette, sadly, and used the money from that to trade pretty much pound for dollar for a 2011 Camaro. Interesting story, as always. I'd been watching it on eBay and it failed to sell, so I contacted the seller, which was a bunch of guys in Lubbock, Texas, and they turned out to be Texas Performance, and they'd been using the car as a test model for their products. And the reason it hadn't sold was because it was a 1-year-old car with 2 owners, because they'd bought it off the original owner. So yeah, it all looked a little bit suspicious. They'd actually put it back to stock, so I offered them the asking price if they would fit one of their exhaust systems, which they refused. So they put it back on eBay, and sadly it sold. A couple of weeks later, he contacted me. The sale had fallen through and asked if I was still interested and I'd be prepared to pay for the exhaust system that they fitted for free. My friend Bill Bain, who lived in Dallas, flew out to the middle of the desert, as he called it, to pick it up, and he looked after it for me for several months actually before I actually moved out to the States. I was very excited to A, be starting a new life in America, and B, pick up my Camaro. Next car up was another Land Rover Freelander. The missus at the time was suitably paranoid about driving on the wrong side of the road and everything else. A Freelander over here is a relatively small car. It was an auto, and yeah, it was nice to be back on familiar territory. One of the few cars I've doubled up on, apart from the TR7, neither of which are particularly great cars, honestly, but there you go. Within the space of the first 6 months, or 9 months maybe, driving around in the Camaro, I managed to get myself 3 speeding tickets and narrowly avoided jail, apparently. I wanted to see how fast it went. I got it up to 140. No, I didn't really, officer. Which apparently is instant jail over here. So I decided to calm down a bit, and given that it was a bit of a target for the police, I traded it in for what is actually the best vehicle I have ever owned. And this one's going to be a little bit of a surprise for people that know me. It's Japanese, it's not sporty, but it's an incredibly capable vehicle and bulletproof reliability. Yes, it's the FJ that I still own today, the car I have owned the longest. Bought it new because the second-hand values of these vehicles were the same, so it made sense to buy it new. And of course they discontinued it the year after I bought it, and although mine's completely trashed inside thanks to the dogs, it's potentially still worth pretty much what I paid for it, which is just ridiculous, honestly. Great vehicle, superb performance off-road. It will cruise all day at 75 obviously, and there's lots of kind of moddy bits out there on eBay and Amazon, etc., just to make it a little bit individual. So mine's got all kinds of different lights, and the front bumper has got a winch in it, and had a lot of adventures in this car, and just totally reliable. Love it. Anyway, didn't see the point of having two off-road vehicles, so chopped in the Land Rover, and the X had to drive the FJ, and I went looking for a Jaguar XKR because my buddy had one in the UK. I'd never had a Jag, and I started searching around for one. Found one at a dealership, but unfortunately at the same time they had available a Maserati 3200 Gran Sport, and compared to the Jag, given that it was the same price, it was so much more fun to drive. And I realised I wasn't quite old enough for a Jaguar yet, and I'm still not. The only issue with that particular model of Maserati is, apart from the second-hand values plummeting, is that the transmission is semi-automatic, and of course this was a very fragile system, not employed by many manufacturers. The Aston Martin Vanquish, the Ferrari, was it the 355 that had that system in it, paddle shift? Bottom line was that the clutch was a ticking time bomb in terms of renewal, servicing, etc., and $5,000 just for the parts. So I drove it quite carefully, or at least considerate of the clutch itself, never in auto mode, so I had some control at least over what gear I was in. But I was always nervous that at some point I was going to end up with this disastrous bill for a new clutch. So on the subject of trading up, I chopped in the old missus for the new one. Much better performance. And she arrived with a Nissan Rogue. In case you're not familiar with that particular model, it's an SUV. I think that stands for slow, ugly vehicle. Yes, that wasn't going to last long in my driveway, I have to tell you. Given the situation with the Mazda, I decided to chop that in, and I reverted to driving around in the FJ and bought a Chrysler 300C, which had always kind of fascinated me. Very capable car, superbly equipped, bloody uncomfortable on long drives actually. The irony being that Mrs. P2 favourite car is a Maserati, and I never let her drive the old one because of the clutch situation. So one day I took the 300C to a meeting in Prescott, except I didn't go to Prescott, I went to Phoenix. I traded it in for Maserati Ghibli, which is now her car, and she loves it. And actually I have to say it's quite nice. It's not as quirky as the Gran Sport. The interior's a bit meh. It's kind of Chrysler-y stuff in there. It still has a Ferrari lump in it, even if it's V6 turbo, and that'll cruise all day at 90 and you don't even know you're doing it. So yeah, very nice car. And again, second-hand values plummets ridiculously, so you can pick one up fairly cheap from the original owner. I don't know who or why anyone would buy one brand new, because you're going to lose your shirt the minute you drive it out of the showroom. A good camera angle, was it? Somewhere in between all that, I think, this baby behind me turned up. There's a full story on that on this channel. Lots of episodes on the condition it turned up in and what it is now, and given it's a continuing project, it'll carry on. So I'm not going to bore you with the details other than it's a 1961 Chevrolet Bel Air, and I bought it on eBay after I had a few drinks. Well, actually, I put a bid in rather than adding it to my watch list because I thought I was going to be outbid, and I kept assuring my wife that yeah, no problem, you know, it always goes crazy in the last 5 minutes. And of course it didn't, and I won it. Oh, completely forgetting bikes again, totally down the four-wheel route, completely forgot about the bikes. So yes, within a month or two of arrival here in the USA, I had been watching various Triumph Speed Triples on eBay, even before I moved here, and surprise, surprise, one turned up in Prescott, just down the road, just a couple of months after I arrived. I still have that today, as you probably know if you've watched any of the other videos of mine. That was kind of an interesting backstory on that, actually, because the guy that used to service my 748 Ducati in the UK, the last time I went to get the bike serviced before I sold it, he had a Buell sitting outside the workshop, and I said, oh, interesting, I'm moving to America and I've been thinking about buying a Buell, what do you think of it? And he said, well, you know, it's okay, it's a bit peaky, honestly, with a Harley motor. It's kind of, the performance is all up the top end, and it comes on in a bit of a rush, and it's not that great. And we went inside and there was a Triumph Speed Triple there, which I'd never really considered. And he said, if you're looking for just a kind of semi-sports bike, he said, you can't do any worse than this. He'd taken it in as a trade a year prior and didn't want to sell it on because he loved riding it so much. So that's why I started looking for those. And I have to say, it's just a great all-round bike. You can poodle along in traffic. And then if you open the taps, it really bloody takes off. So yeah, great bike. And contrary to the Triumphs when I was a kid, it's actually very reliable. So despite the ex's disapproval of the Triumph, I then negotiated a deal, again another unsold eBay item, with a guy in Indiana who owned a gun shop. So I wasn't going to mess with him. But yeah, I negotiated a deal with the MV Agusta, and I knew the ex was going to throw a wobbly, so a mate of mine hid it in his garage for a month before I owned up to actually buying it. Anyway, usual idle threat of divorce because I'd got too many bikes and she didn't want me riding bikes at all, which of course came true in the end. And that is actually the bike that I started this channel with, tearing it apart and turning it into a custom motorbike, which is almost complete. So, having traded up on the wife front, I also added to the motorcycle collection with another Ducati 748 because I loved my Duke back in the UK so much, and this one was pristine. It was a two-owner bike. The guy was in Florida, he was a doctor, he had 5 Ducatis, he just bought another one, and he was just making room. It was immaculate. Unfortunately, the guy that transported it here dropped it in the trailer. Wasn't his fault. One of the belts broke and there's a couple of scuffs on it, but it is still immaculate and a 3-owner bike. And I've toyed with the idea of selling it, but it hasn't sold, and maybe that's for a reason. Still, to my mind, one of the most beautiful production bike designs ever, honestly. And then there was another eBay incident. So my wife went away for a couple of days and I was left looking at eBay, and a Senna edition of the MV Agusta 750 F4, which I already had one of, came up on eBay. and I'm not going to say how much it was, but the starting bid was so low that I figured, I hadn't learned with the Bel Air. I'll just put a bid in because I'm bound to get outbid, and nobody else bid on it. I didn't even really have the money at the time, but I scraped it together and honoured my bid, which several people haven't when they've been buying my Ducati. Yeah, so I ended up with a fabulous Senna edition MV Agusta 750 F4. Beautiful, beautiful bike. It didn't seem to make any sense to me to ride it and devalue it because I already had a 750 F4. I rode it a couple of times, and because it was the STR version, it was noticeably more punchy. But on a day-to-day basis, there's no point in riding it around and putting miles on it, just back and forth to the office. So it pretty much stayed here under cover. I couldn't have it out to look at, and it just seemed a bit silly, really, and a bit of a waste of a bike. So eventually, don't get me started on the story about Bring a Trailer, but I did eventually sell it on Bring a Trailer to a charming man who owns a motorcycle museum in the Carmel area of California, and he rides it, and it's in front of shop in the museum, so you can get it out easy enough and take it out for a ride. And lovely bloke, and I'm really pleased where it ended up because I know he'll take good care of it, and he's exercising it at the same time and enjoying it. So perfect solution. I can't honestly remember if this was before or after the Senna, but I'd always wanted, only for the craziest reasons, a Kawasaki KH, one of the two-stroke triples back in the 70s. Beautifully simple, subtle curves, fantastic looking bike. And it wasn't that I wasn't brave enough to have the 750, it's just that they command ridiculous prices. Anyway, I found a KH500, which was in Ohio, and thankfully my father-in-law lives in Ohio, so he picked it up and kept it at his house for a little while, and eventually I got it transported here, and it was beautiful. But here's the thing, in the US we have this thing called altitude, and Ohio is fairly flat and low level, I guess, and Arizona is not, and Sedona is 4,500 feet above sea level. So it didn't run too well, and it would have required all kinds of rejetting and aggravation, and I just couldn't be bothered. It was nice to own it, it was nice to ride it a couple of times, and it didn't run well, and I sold it, and I made a little bit of a profit, so hey. Fantastic bike, and worthy of the the dubious widowmaker label, because the power did really come in at a rush, being a two-stroke. So then what? Then the pandemic happened, and Trump time happened, and all the time I'd been watching Bring a Trailer because it's quite fascinating, although I haven't checked in for a month or so, honestly. I had noticed a crazy trend in ridiculous prices for Honda CT70s, crazy little monkey bike, which they were going for like anywhere between $5,000 and not quite 10 grand. So I started looking at these on eBay and seeing all kinds of shapes and sizes of them in terms of quality and need of reparation. And I didn't understand the market well enough. It's all about originality. And the one that I found that I eventually bought, and I call it my Trump bike, mainly because it was a financial disaster. And secondly, because I bought it with the money that we got dished out when the pandemic hit. Anyway, it was in California, so just down the road from my buddy Steve, who runs Apex Protection Project, a wolf dog sanctuary. So he went and collected it, and he was coming this way, transporting a wolf dog to a new home. Or picking one up, I think, actually, as it was. And he came with his volunteer and friend, Ken, who was really into these kind of bikes. And he said, yeah, you shouldn't have bought this one because it's not original. It's got a Pirahna 140cc, not 70cc motor in it. So, you know, it's not remotely original. It's got a disc brake on the front. It's got different handlebars, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, yeah, whatever. But he was right. So I learned my lesson there, and while it was easy to work on and easy to store because it's tiny, didn't make any money on it at all. Eventually got rid of it for pretty much what I put into it. But yeah, I mean, who'd be crazy enough to put a 140cc motor into one of those? Apparently it was capable of 75 miles an hour. I didn't want to do more than 30 on it, to be honest. So that was that little episode, and since then I've bought something else, a Ducati Monster, which was a good price because it was tatty, and that is project number 2 for Tink Customs. Well, in real terms anyway. And we'll see how that turns out. If you're interested, go check out that particular playlist in my channel. It's a teardown. It looked good on the surface, a few scratches on the tank, but otherwise okay. But of course you start tearing it apart and you find all kinds of horrors. So I think that just about sums the US side of the pond up. But I nearly forgot a couple of unmentionables, both with a little story attached. Firstly, there is the Mercury Cougar, a 1971, somewhat of a family heirloom, it appears, to be passed down amongst the women in the family. And at the time it was my brother-in-law's in Colorado, and when Betsy and I got married, he drove it all the way from Colorado and surprised us with a wedding gift. It's actually more a game of pass the parcel, and somebody gets left with it at some point. And then back on the Italian car theme, I spotted this little Fiat 124 convertible, lovely little car actually. Always kind of thought I'd like one. Anyway, it was local here in Sedona, and I went to see it, and it was a reasonable price, honestly. But I just couldn't pull the trigger on it, and I walked away from it. I had enough projects going on at the time. It needed a little TLC. It was running, but a bit shabby. Thoroughly nice guy, and clearly no one else was interested, so he contacted me about a month later, dropping the price by something like 30%, at which point I could not refuse. So I bought it. I spent a little money doing it up, new carpets, new steering wheel, new exhaust, a nice Answer exhaust system on it, all kinds of little bits and pieces, repaired the dash with some Alcantara because that had all cracked up in the Arizona sun. Yeah, generally got it ship shape and put it out there on Craigslist, I think it was. Somebody from Holland, or was it Belgium, bought it. Yeah, it was a lot of fun actually. Not powerful, but a lot of fun to drive. Nice little car, very chuckable. Thank you for watching. It's obviously only been a decade, so there's plenty more to come, and I may do another another episode in another decade, who knows. If you haven't already, subscribe now, why wouldn't you? And do encourage others to watch my lunacy.